Hello casters, and welcome to this beginner's guide to the Earth element in Elestrals. Today I'm going to break down all of the runes Earth has access to, as well as the best Elestrals you can be playing. I'm also going to touch on the pros and cons of playing Earth currently in the metagame, and discuss the current best builds. There'll be a guide like this for every element in Elestrals on the channel, so if you find this video helpful, make sure you check those out. But for now, let's dig into Earth. Starting with the Divine rune then, we have Demeter. When you cast this Demeter, you can enchant up to 3 Earth Spirits to it, and then you can disenchant an Earth from this in order to give +3 attack and defense to an Elestral until the end phase. This is one of the strongest Divine runes we have access to because it helps all of our Elestrals win in combat, helping us maintain the board. At the same time, you'll see momentarily that we have some fantastic Nexus options in Earth, and Divine runes are a great way to get additional spirits onto the board for you to Nexus off of. Next up we have the Stadium rune for Loy Forest. As with every other elemental stadium, it's giving +1 attack and defense for each Earth Spirit enchanting these Elestrals. And Earth's current artifact is Scythe of Demeter. It costs 2 Earth and empowers the Elestral with +2 attack and +3 defense. When that Elestral destroys another Elestral in battle, you can return 1 Earth from your underworld to your spirit deck. Or if Demeter is enchanted, you can return 2 Earth instead. That means if your empowered Elestral actually connects with the Scythe, you are getting a little bit of healing or somewhat of a refund on the Scythe. And Earth overall has a lack of healing tools, so this artifact isn't fantastic, but might sometimes still make it into the Earth builds. Onto the Invoke and Counter runes for Earth, we start with Earthquake, which is a 2-cost Invoke rune, which simply targets and destroys an Elestral. This card is so powerful that it's limited to 1 copy in our decks, but it's a no-brainer to be playing in every Earth list. And honestly, it's so good that many other archetypes will choose to play 2 Earth Spirits in their spirit deck, and 1 copy of this Earthquake, because when you see it, it's still fantastic. Next up we have the Ambrosia Cornucopia. It also costs 2 Earth Spirits to cast, and it reads, draw a card, then return any number of spirits from your underworld to your spirit deck for the number of Ambrosia in your underworld. Typically, this is just going to be weaker than something like Nectar of the Gods, because there's no guarantee that you're going to have any Ambrosia in your underworld, and oftentimes it's just stronger to see 2 cards rather than the 1 that this provides. This card has enabled some combo strategies in the game, however, just by hitting a critical mass of cards which can draw. So even though it doesn't function in traditional builds, it can still be an option players look towards if they're really trying to motor through the deck. Next up we have Sandstorm. This is a Wind and Earth Invoke rune. For each Elestral that is not Earth enchanted, return it to its owner's hand if it's in defense. Otherwise, change it to defense. And until the end phase, those Elestrals cannot change position. This is an expensive Invoke rune, and it's not exactly removal, but as we know, changing combat positions is always handy, and it can almost be like a reset option if the opponent's built a bigger board than you. The counter rune Earth has access to is Bloom. For 1 Earth Spirit, you can Nexus 1 Earth Spirit, and if you do, you can also enchant an Earth Spirit to an Elestral on your field. Usually I find this to be a little bit weaker than something like Altar of Stars, which is an Omni counter option, but because there are so many good Nexus Earth creatures, it may still be worth running 1 or 2 copies of this in addition to Altar of Stars. That leads us nicely onto the Nexus and Receive cards that Earth has. We start with Equilinx. It's a 1 Spirit 4/3 that states you can Nexus up to 2 Earth. When you do, target and destroy a rune. Equilinx is probably in the top 3 or 4 Elestrals in the game. Enabling Nexus is incredible, and having rune removal is absolutely insane. Very often you can pop back row face downs to allow the Equilinx to get an attack in the turn it's played, or you can instantly target opponents' Divine or Stadium runes. It's this Equilinx and also Mudlet which makes a Nexus approach so powerful in Earth. Speaking of which, we have Mudlet. It's a 3/3, and when it receives 1 or more Earth Spirits, you can change the position of an Elestral. This is very similar to the Water version in Eddy, but Mudlet is a receive effect, so there can be situations when it's on your opponent's turn where you can use cards like Altar of Stars to stop an opponent attacking altogether. So not only is Mudlet great coming onto the board and switching something to get a favourable trade into an Elestral, but when it does stick onto the board, it still has extra payoff. Next up we have Panzer. It's also a 3/3, but it does gain +1 defense for each Earth enchanting it. You can Nexus up to 2 Earth Spirits, and when you do, you can return an Earth from your underworld to your spirit deck, or enchant from your underworld to this Panzer. This does give Earth a little bit of healing, and Panzer can become a tanky wall, as well as being just another means of getting more spirits into play at any one time, so that you can cash in on your other Nexus users. Finally, we have Clovey. It's a 1/4, and when it receives 1 or more Earth Spirit, you can draw a card. This is definitely Ask Rabbit at home. Its stats are far weaker and you're only seeing 1 card rather than picking the best from 3. But once again, it's a receive effect, so does combine nicely with Nexusing plays. For the other staples in Earth, we have Viserys. It's a 4/2, but gains +1 attack for each Viserys on your field. That includes itself, so as soon as it comes into play, it's a 5/2. When this Viserys destroys an Elestral in battle, you can special cast a Viserys from your hand or deck in defense position. This is a great way to overwhelm an opponent with attacking options, and by special casting the additional Viserys, your attack position Viserys will be even harder to get over. Next up we have Moss Station. It's a 4/1, but gains +2 attack for each Earth enchanting it, so effectively it hits the board as a 6/1, and during your end phase you must change this Moss Station to defense position if it attacked this turn. It's only fair to have a drawback on a card like this that can so easily reach 6 attack, and again with Nexus options can be pushed even further. The good news is, with the likes of Altar of Stars and Mudlet in the deck, there are ways that you can turn your Moss Station back into attack position to keep it safe on the board. Next up we have Verdalith. It's a 2 spirit costing 3/7 that can be normal cast with 2 spirits if your opponent has 4 or more spirits in their spirit deck than you do. And then when you cast this Verdalith, you can return up to 4 Earth spirits from your underworld to your spirit deck. This is a huge burst of healing, but it's situational. Of course you can still ascend into this card, but usually its defensive stats doesn't mold that well with the aggressive archetype that Earth is trying to be. Typically I'd see Verdalith as a side deck option if you're coming up against burning strategies, or possibly a main deck card as a one-of, but because of the situational nature of the card, it's a little bit difficult to justify in high accounts. Finally, we have Sproutir. It's a 3/5 body that when normal cast can search your deck for an artifact and add it to your hand. It's great to have a searching option, especially on a body of this size, but artifacts are typically some of the weaker cards in the game. This does help enable a strategy in Earth with an Ascension that we'll be looking at in a moment, but one of the best ways to utilize artifacts right now is actually with Argo, and that's a card that wants to have the artifacts actually in the deck rather than in hand, whilst being like a combat trick that can surprise opponents. So Sproutir often doesn't make the cut in Nexus builds of Earth, but could be useful for some more rogue options. Speaking of which, let's get on to the Ascension options for Earth. We have Sire Nectar, which is a 2/1 Earth Elestral that states when a player casts Poison Tipped Arrow, Poison Nectar, or Poison Tunic, you can special ascend this Sire Nectar to Wasp Ivy from your hand or deck. Wasp Ivy is a 2-spirit 8/1 Earth Elestral that reads when this Wasp Ivy is destroyed in battle, an opponent must expend 3 spirits. And this Wasp Ivy is unaffected by opponent's counter runes if it ascended from Sire Nectar. So there's easy ways to ramp into this card aggressively, and it also punishes the opponent for destroying it in battle, so it can sometimes overwhelm opponents. Next up we have Boltuga and Vesuvatuga. Boltuga is a 3/4 Earth Elestral that when normal cast, you can expend an Earth in order to search your deck or underworld for an eruption and add it to your hand. And Vesuvatuga is a Earth and Fire Elestral with 5 attack and 8 defense, allowing you to expend 1 fire to force an opponent to expend 2 spirits. Additionally, when a player casts Eruption, you can return 2 Earth spirits from your underworld to your spirit deck. You can see the synergy. Boltuga allows you to grab the Eruption so that you can get maximum value from your Vesuvatuga when you ascend into it, but even just sitting on the board and forcing an opponent to expend 2 can be very tricky to deal with, especially on a body this size. Getting onto the main competitive archetypes, I think Earth Nexus is far and away the best one you can be playing here, and in fact Earth Nexus is probably among the top 3 of decks in the game right now. Earth simply has access to some of the best combat Elestrals in the game, and you get to pair that with Demeter. It means you're constantly trying to fight for the board very aggressively, and finding those instances to utilize Nexus, particularly Equilinks, can often be a massive swing in games. You'll see in my specific list, because I'm not really inspired by any Earth healing options, I am quite high on the Zaptor spirits, and I'm playing a couple copies of Quackle. The idea being that you just pay for most of your back row runes with these Thunder Spirits and have a more reliable healer, rather than going heavy down the Earth direction and having Verdalith. The other decent Earth archetype is revolving around that Wasp Ivy. Cards like Argo and Sproutir can add some good consistency to the list to get that Wasp Ivy going as quickly as possible. Fitting in all those cards does sort of detract from a regular Nexus approach, so it doesn't really benefit you to play what is traditionally some of the stronger Elestrals Earth has access to, which is mostly its main drawback. But there's no doubt that that Wasp Ivy can be a huge headache if the opponent isn't running Cryoblast. Going on to the pros and cons of Earth then, Demeter is amazing for helping you win those early combats, and the Nexus strategy is just fantastic for the receivers that Earth has access to. Earth also just has plenty of big bodies to pick from. Not only do they have very solid attack stats, but cards like Equilinks and Mudlet naturally avoid Cryoblast. which might force opponents to crash their Elestrals into yours rather than have easy uptrades, which is just another reason why Earth is so good at fighting for the board. The main downsides of Earth right now is that not many of them actually generate hand advantage. Their main payoff is just that they're sticky when they're on the board, but that's usually reliant on having Nexus combos lined up with Demeter, with Fulloy Forest. So these cards kind of thrive together, but also if your opponent can pick apart your Nexus pieces, they immediately become far less impressive Elestrals. The only other main con right now is that lack of good healing. Yes, I know Verdlif is a huge burst of 4 spirits recovered, but you usually have to play in such a way to weave it in the first place that you're almost massaging a situation where Verdlif can be cast, that it often doesn't serve the right purpose that you're actually looking for in the card. It's actually one of the reasons why I love the combination of Thunder and Earth, because I think combined you have a good combination of hand advantage and combat winning. There's a link in the description below to a website which is actually usually for Pokemon, but I've imported all of the important Elestrals cards into this. So if you want to get reading and catch up on what the best Elestrals are in every type, feel free to do so, and check out some baseline deck lists for some of the top archetypes in the game. I hope you enjoyed today's video, make sure you check out the other elements, and I'll see you soon for another video. Cheers.